Horizon Gents, welcome to Suji Reacts, and this is China winning the trade war? Virtual TLDR News Global. We're gonna win so much, you're gonna get tired of winning. I guess he was talking to China, Xi Jinping. So yeah, obviously this is a question mark. So this channel is just asking question. I don't know what's happening right now. I guess trade war is still going on. They still put tariffs on China, which is, I don't know, man. US relies on China a lot. It was like, what is 10-20% tariff? Now it's 140. How does that work? Like, how instantly at least 70 to 80% of things you buy is gonna get costly, right? India has 1.4 billion people, just as much China, and yet I would say at least half of the thing we use in India is at least coming from China, which is like even India is reliant on China. Do you understand how important China is when it comes to making shit? So I don't know how that's gonna work out, but I guess we'll see. So let's do this one. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. So I know which type of videos to react to more. I like to watch this type of videos, like it's kind of getting up to date to things, right? I like to watch these videos and like watch comments because yeah, channels could be biased. So I like to see the comments and can like judge from there, like how biased a channel is. So definitely comment anything you have to say. It's really, I guess, yeah, it clears things for me. So let's watch this one.
Threatened to start a trade war with China during last year's election campaign, there was a pretty broad consensus that China was in trouble. Chinese exporters rely heavily on the American market. The Chinese economy was looking shaky, and most of the inflationary impact on the US would probably be absorbed by the strong dollar. Unfortunately for Trump, however, this isn't how things have panned out. The dollar is weakening, America's economy now looks like the shaky one, and it turns out China has more leverage in this trade war than most commentators originally thought. So, in this video, we're going to look at the escalating US-China trade war, who's winning, and what might happen next.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, China could do certain things that gives them the monopoly now, right? US always had the monopoly since World War II, a lot of economical things, and that's how it worked. That's what Russia was saying, like, okay, let's get away from the dollar, let's create our own thing. And they were like trying to band together with China, Iran, trying to get India as well to create this kind of a different type of standard for currency, so world doesn't have to rely on dollar type of way. So I don't know how that's going to pan out, but we'll see. And to the people in comment, you don't know nothing what you're talking about. Either say more or don't say anything. Like, you don't know nothing, that doesn't really help me much. Like, at what point you're talking about I don't know anything. I'm talking about like general knowledge here. Like, I'm not saying anything specific. That's why I'm watching this video. That is why this is a reaction. I mean,
Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's just start with a quick overview of all the tariffs Trump has imposed on China since coming into office. Because, well, it can be hard to keep track. Even before Trump took office, the average US tariff on Chinese imports was about 20%. This was largely a consequence of tariffs imposed by Trump in his first term, focused on certain commodities like steel and strategically sensitive goods like solar panels.
yeah, look, man, here's the thing. People have like always talked about how things are getting costlier. If Trump started the tariff on China, we just saw the graphs with his first presidency, and now he's intensifying. Trump is the reason why things are costlier for you. Because like I said, most of the things you use comes from China. If there's a tariff on it, that's you paying more money in the hopes that you don't buy those products and you buy local grown product. There is no local grown products, right? So you have to buy the Chinese one with a tariff. So you'll just see the hike of price and you're like, oh, things are getting costlier.
For context, the average US tariff for imports from the rest of the world was about 3%. However, in his second term, Trump has taken things up a notch, sparking an unprecedented tit-for-tat trade war with Beijing. This really began on February the 1st, when Trump imposed a flat 10% tariff on all Chinese imports, on top of the pre-existing tariffs. 3 days later, China retaliated with a 15% tariff on coal and liquefied natural gas imports from the US, as well as a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and large displacement cars. On March the 3rd, Trump added another 10%.
China uses American cars. Which one? Don't they use mostly their own made or like German ones, Volkswagen and things? They use Chevrolets and like Fords. I don't know, man.
Again, China retaliated with more tariffs on certain US agricultural exports. On April the 2nd, otherwise known as Liberation Day, Trump slapped a further 34% tariff on all Chinese imports. 2 days later, China retaliated with a symmetrical 34% tariff. On April the 7th, Trump threatened another 50%. On April the 9th, China retaliated by preemptively adding another 50% itself, taking China's flat tariff rate on US imports to 84%. On April the 10th, Trump upped the stakes by taking America's flat tariff rate on all Chinese imports up to 145%. And on April the 11th, China went to 125%, effectively ending bilateral trade between...
I like Trump's like, you want to go crazy? Let's go, son. Just amplified 145 and China like, I'm gonna, yeah, okay, fine, 125. Let's not go equal to him because he's just gonna keep raising it up. Let's see 125 and maybe he'll stop raising it from there.
Between the world's two biggest economies. Now, originally, the Trump administration seemed pretty confident about all this. Earlier this week, Trump claimed that the ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. His Treasury Secretary, Scott...
What deal? You want factories to come back. China has nothing to do with that. You put tariffs so companies realize like, wait a minute, this is more costlier. People are not buying our shit, so let's put local factories. That is the goal. So what deal are you talking about? What does China has to do with, like, I don't know.
Bessent told CNBC that, quote, China are playing with a pair of twos. What do we lose by the Chinese raising tariffs on us? We export 1/5 to them of what they export to us. The basic argument here seems to be that the US runs a massive trade deficit with China, which means Chinese businesses need access to the American market more than vice versa. There's definitely some truth to this, and most economists originally expected a trade war to hurt.
There are two elements to that. First of all, a lot of things that your companies, Apple and shit, makes things in China, the raw ingredients of that comes from China, and China doesn't like charge them that much, so the price of them is really low. So on that graph, when it shows like, okay, how much money does Chinese product have on, like, that's not really a perfect graph, because if an Apple factory is in China, if China is the one selling them to them, it's not going to show up on that graph, because China is not really selling anything to US. It's selling to Apple factory that is already in China. Now if you bring back those factories in US, now you will need Chinese goods that you didn't need before in US, and these tariffs will fuck you. Like, yeah, that's how. So that graph doesn't show the whole picture.
China more than America. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated last year, for instance, that if both countries imposed a 60% flat tariff on each other, China's GDP would shrink by $770 billion, while America's would only shrink by $327 billion. However, that's not quite how things have panned out. In fact, Trump has quickly pulled back on a number of tariffs, including a huge exemption for cell phones, computer equipment, and many electronic components.
Where China is dominant when it comes to making. Sure, China makes clothes and every fucking thing you can think of. That's more of a past thing. Nowadays, electronics is where China is shining. Most of the batteries, phones, and anything electronic you can think of, it's probably made in China. So if you pull that fool away from that, like, okay, why would China care now?
Representing nearly a quarter of all Chinese imports, and is now requesting negotiations. On Tuesday, Bessent penned a piece in the Wall Street Journal essentially asking America's allies to help the US isolate China economically. But
why would they do that? If you share the plan in advance, maybe, but now I don't think so.
It got little traction because, well, America doesn't have that many friends at the moment. Conversely, China is sounding increasingly confident. Bloomberg reported on Wednesday that Beijing is now insisting that Trump show more, quote, consistency and respect before any talks, and that Xi himself won't bother with preliminary talks until it looks like a deal is actually possible.
Not to mention, there was a recent news in the paper where China is in talk with India to have certain type of business element. I'm guessing the same thing they were, like taking from US, they're looking alternative source. So yeah, they're trying to look for to make certain things and to buy certain things. There was a recent news, so probably it's that.
Beijing also apparently wants Trump to, quote, rein in members of his cabinet, a thinly veiled reference to J.D. Vance's provocative comment about Chinese peasants earlier this month. And China Daily, the
Borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy things Chinese peasant manufacture. Okay. I'm gonna guess that I don't think he was talking about now. I think he was talking about when this all started decades ago, like a 2 or so decade ago, right? When China was like really poor and like US-China relations just kind of started and like this jumped Chinese economy really exponentially. Like in a 10-year span, China looked completely different. I guess he's talking about the start of it. I don't know.
Provocative comment about Chinese peasants earlier this month. And China Daily, the CCP's English language mouthpiece, told the US to, quote, stop whining in an editorial earlier this week. So why aren't things going to plan for Trump here? Well, as we see it, there are at least 4 reasons. For starters, China relies less on the US than it used to. In 2018, at the start of the first trade war, the US accounted for 20% of
China has passed that threshold where China needs anyone, right? China needed US to become rich for a long time. Now, since they're a $20 trillion economy, not to mention most of the rare things is in China, and China can be self-reliant in that way, like they have a lot of goods that they can use. Or some of the things they would need to import, but like there is enough countries in the world. Out of 200, I'm pretty sure they'll find some countries that can trade with them. So they're probably going to be self-reliant pretty fine. So yeah, nowadays, China doesn't need US that much.
China's total exports, but this figure has since fallen to about 13%. Second, while American exporters might not suffer that much, American consumers still want a lot from China, which means that, combined with a weak dollar, the trade war could push up inflation to politically unpalatable levels. This speaks to Trump's somewhat one-sided view of trade deficits. While it's true that Chinese businesses sell a lot of stuff to America, that's because American consumers like Chinese stuff. Both countries are sort of dependent on one another in this respect.
Yeah, you want cheap shit. Let's be honest. There was a like graph, like out of 4 grocery bags that Americans buy, they throw away at least one of them and only use 3. That's how much shit you have. Like you don't care for like anything. You'll buy things and just waste away because Chinese things are cheaper. Now, if you're gonna go war against that, you're gonna have to realize like, oh, buy only things that you need, and that will still cost you more than before. Like, I don't think people can be comfortable like that in a democracy. At least people will be like, what the fuck, you did this, and people will just riot.
Respect, as Trump's recent exemptions for smartphones tacitly admits. Of course, China's retaliatory tariffs will also lead to higher inflation in China, but A, inflation is currently lower in China than it is in the US, and B, it's not like disgruntled Chinese can vote Xi out at the midterms. This takes us nicely on...
See, that's what I meant by democracy. US is democracy. China is like, come on, precedent for life. Like, at some point, China can just say, shut the fuck up. Yeah, I know, yeah, inflation and everything, but we'll figure it out. Until then, shut up. The US can't do that.
Third reason, the politics of a trade war are easier for the CCP. Not only does she not have to worry about re-election, America's aggressive posture also means that the CCP can easily blame everything on Trump. Conversely, many Americans will be asking why Trump has chosen to inflict so much economic pain on them, given he came to office promising to bring down the price of groceries. And fourth, while China might struggle in a tit-for-tat tariff-based trade war, it has other economic weapons at its disposal. Just this week, for instance, China cancelled all Boeing orders, heaping more pressure on the American airline giant, and suspended the export of certain critical materials and magnets to the US.
What is it, Brazil? Brazil is like really big manufacturer of planes, right? So they can go to alternative source like that.
These are essential to a whole range of advanced manufacturing sectors, and speaks to another asymmetry in the US-China trade relationship. While China mainly imports agricultural products from the US, which can easily be sourced from other countries like Brazil, the US relies on China for a whole range of critical manufacturing components and commodities, which can't be easily sourced elsewhere. In the worst-case scenario, China could also dump its holding of US debt, including treasuries and other agency bonds, potentially sparking...
Yeah, there was also, I don't remember what it was, but there was also like the whole thing about how US's chips and like satellites that they made, certain components of that is only made in China. So if US and Taiwan does go, Taiwan slash US goes to war with China, China can just stop giving them this resource. How they're going to make components for this, like chips and everything that they use in missiles, planes, satellites. So that's what I meant, rare earth element. Like China has advantage on a lot of places.
A full-blown debt crisis. All in all, it's clear that Trump's trade war isn't going to plan. For Trump, this is bad news in and of itself, but it's also bad because it's shown to America's other trading partners that A, you can win a trade war against the US, and B, even Trump ultimately caves to domestic political pressure. Regardless,
Yeah, this was how Putin basically decided to go war against Ukraine. This is that element. Russia is like one of the two most powerful country. Oh, by the way, there's this news of corruption. We don't know how good our tanks are. We don't know how good our equipment are. These were all just like he said, she said type of shit. Until Putin decided to go to war against Ukraine. Now he's out in the open. Wait a minute, tanks doesn't work really. Now wait a minute, Russia can't just point blank win war against Ukraine. And just like reputation decreased. For years, people like, okay, how powerful is US's position when it comes to global economy? China is rising, right? China is rising, all this thing is happening. Things like this will show like, okay, how much power China has, which is kind of like fucked up.
in 2025, one thing is certain. We can expect the news cycle to continue being dominated by these same major figures. But who's the most influential? In the most recent edition of our magazine, Too Long, we find out. That's because
Yeah, but go to original video page link from there, support this channel. Yeah, this is a very interesting trade war. Because like I said, like cards are open out just in front of everyone, right? Like for years, like who has more economical pull now? Because US was so dominant for so many decades, there was never a question like who's dominant. It's USA. Why are we even talking? For past a decade or so, wait a minute, China is getting more and more powerful. And now it's just like because of this, I guess we'll see like who has more hold and who has more pull on things. It's going to be interesting. I don't know. All right, well, that was is China winning the trade war. I mean, what is a winning the trade war? I guess it's like people will have ups and downs. Like in the end, everybody's going to lose somewhat. Maybe if Trump knows what he's doing, and that's maybe. In a long term, USA will have more factories and more stability. But does American people at big number want to do these jobs? Because even a lot of you want to do that. Is enough if you want to do that, they can just sustain this many factories, right? Because if like 100, you just put, like 145% tariff there, implying all the 100% of the factory that is in China that you use, you can put that in US. Do you have that enough people to do that? If you're just going to put 30% of the factory, what about other 70%? You don't want to screw that with tariff. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. All right, I'll see you next time.